Why bother keeping these? It's not like you'll ever amount to anything, my sister said as she shredded my documents, after I refused to co-sign her loan. Mom laughed. She's just joking. I stayed quiet. That evening, I made a few calls and signed a few papers. But at 8 a.m., she woke up to news she never expected. I, 32M, watched the paper shreds flutter to the floor like confetti at the world's worst celebration. My sister stood over my desk with that smirk she'd perfected since childhood, the one that said she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care about the consequences. In her hands were the tattered remains of documents I'd spent months preparing: patent applications, business proposals, investor agreements. Everything I'd worked for in my consulting firm, reduced to garbage. She asked me if I was really going to make a big deal out of this. After all, weren't these just papers? Mom stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, shaking her head at me like I was the unreasonable one. She told me to stop being so dramatic, that my sister was just playing around. The same excuse I'd heard my entire life whenever my sister crossed a line. Just playing. Just joking. Just being herself. This started 3 weeks earlier when my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. She needed me to co-sign a loan for $75,000. She'd explained it casually, like she was asking to borrow $20 for lunch. The money was for a business opportunity, she said. A friend of a friend knew someone who was looking for investors in a boutique downtown. Prime location, guaranteed returns, couldn't miss it. I asked her what kind of business plan she had, what research she'd done, who these people were. She waved away my questions like they were flies at a picnic. I was overthinking it, she told me. This was a sure thing. All she needed was my signature because the bank wouldn't approve her a loan. Her credit history had a few rough patches, she admitted, but that was all behind her now. I'd said no. Not because I didn't want to help her, but because I'd been down this road before. 5 years ago, I'd lent her $15,000 for a different venture, a photography business that folded within 6 months. She'd promised to pay me back, swore on everything that mattered. I was still waiting for $1. Before that, there was the catering business that never launched, the online store that never sold anything, and the dog walking service that lasted exactly 2 weeks. She didn't take the rejection well. Her face had gone red, and she'd told me I was selfish, that family was supposed to help each other. I reminded her about the money she still owed me, and she'd laughed. That was years ago, she said. Was I really going to hold that over her head forever? I should just let it go. When I still refused, she'd stormed out. I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. The paper shredding happened on a Tuesday morning. I'd left my home office unlocked while I took a shower, and my sister had let herself in using the spare key she'd somehow never returned. Mom had driven her over, apparently. They'd been planning this little visit as a surprise, Mom explained. They wanted to see me, spend some time together. Family bonding. I stood there in my sweatpants, hair still wet, watching the last of my patent application disappear into strips. That document represented 6 months of work with a legal team. The business proposals were scheduled for meetings next week with potential investors who could take my consulting firm to the next level. The investor agreements had taken 3 months to negotiate. My sister told me this was what happened when I decided to be a terrible brother. She said I clearly had money for lawyers and fancy papers, so I definitely had money to help family. Then came the line that made my jaw clench. She asked why I was bothering to keep these papers anyway, since it wasn't like I'd ever amount to anything. Mom had actually laughed at that one, adding that my sister was just joking around, that I needed to lighten up. I stayed quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't kick them out. I just stood there, doing mental calculations while my sister continued her rant about how ungrateful and selfish I'd become since I started making decent money. She reminded me that when we were kids, she'd always shared her toys with me. I should remember where I came from. Family helped family, and I'd forgotten that. Mom chimed in again, suggesting that maybe I should reconsider the loan. It would mean so much to my sister, and wouldn't it be nice to see her succeed for once? I could afford it, Mom reasoned. I had this nice apartment, drove a decent car, clearly had money for lawyers. What was $75,000 to me? I told them both to leave. My sister asked if I was seriously mad about some stupid papers. I could just reprint them, couldn't I? Everything was on computers these days anyway. She honestly didn't understand why I was being so sensitive. Mom said we should all sit down and talk this through like adults, but I was done talking. I walked to the door and held it open until they finally left, my sister muttering about what a jerk I'd become. After they were gone, I spent an hour picking up paper shreds, trying to see if anything was salvageable. It wasn't. Every document was thoroughly destroyed. Some of these papers had original signatures from other parties. Some had notarized seals. All of it was gone. That evening, I made some calls. The first was to my lawyer, explaining what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to proceed with what he was about to suggest. I told him I was certain. We spent 2 hours on the phone going through options and implications. He'd send over paperwork by morning. The second call was to my accountant. We had a different kind of conversation, one about assets and protections and family dynamics. She'd warned me years ago about keeping clear boundaries with financial matters. I should have listened sooner. We made a plan. The third call was to my sister's landlord. I'd been the one paying her rent for the past 8 months, ever since she'd lost her last job. The payments came from a separate account she didn't know about, arranged through my accountant to look like they came from a rental assistance program. I'd done it because Mom kept calling me, crying about how my sister might be evicted. Family helped family, right? I told the landlord the assistance program was ending. The payments would stop after this month. The fourth call was to Mom's mortgage company. 3 years ago, when Dad died, Mom was going to lose the house. I'd refinanced it under my name, kept the payments going, never told her. She thought some life insurance policy of Dad's had covered everything. I started the process of transferring it back to her name, with the outstanding balance clearly noted. She'd be responsible for the mortgage now, all $140,000 remaining. I made sure the paperwork would be delivered by courier tomorrow morning. The fifth call was to my business partner. I explained what happened and told him we needed to accelerate our plans. We'd been discussing opening a second office across the state, and I wanted to move forward immediately. I also wanted to restructure our partnership agreement to add additional protections against third-party claims. He understood without me having to spell it out. The final call was to a private investigator I'd worked with on a corporate case last year. I asked him to do a comprehensive background check on my sister's business opportunity. I wanted to know everything about the boutique, the investors, the friend of a friend, all of it. He said he'd have preliminary information by morning. I spent the rest of the evening signing papers my lawyer sent over. The most important one was a cease and desist letter warning my sister about property destruction and potential legal consequences if she tried anything similar again. There was also a formal demand for the $15,000 she'd borrowed years ago, with interest calculated. And finally, a restraining order application, ready to file if she stepped foot in my apartment again without permission. I didn't sleep much that night. Part of me felt guilty, like I was overreacting. This was my family. My sister, despite everything, was still my sister. Mom was still my mom. But then I'd remember the paper shreds on the floor, the smirk on my sister's face, Mom's laughter, the years of enabling and excuses, the expectation that I'd just keep giving and giving while getting nothing back but demands for more. At 8 in the morning, I got my first text from Mom. She wanted to know why a courier had delivered mortgage documents to her house. Why did these papers say she owed $140,000? There must be some mistake. She'd called the mortgage company and they'd told her the property was being transferred back to her name, that I'd been paying the mortgage for 3 years. She demanded to know what I'd done. The second text came from my sister 10 minutes later. Her landlord had called her about the rent. What rental assistance program was he talking about? Why was it ending? She accused me of playing some kind of sick game. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I waited for the third call I knew was coming. It arrived at 8:30. The private investigator had worked fast. The boutique investment was a scam. The friend of a friend was running a scheme that had already defrauded 4 other people out of more than $200,000 combined. There was an active police investigation. Anyone who'd signed on as an investor or co-signer was likely to be dragged into the legal mess. If I'd signed that loan, I'd be liable not just for the $75,000, but potentially for fraud charges as accessories. I forwarded the investigator's report to my sister and Mom without comment. The phone started ringing immediately. Mom first, then my sister, then Mom again. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to the messages later. Mom was crying, asking how I could do this to her, to family. Didn't I care that she might lose the house? She'd raised me better than this. She'd sacrificed everything for us growing up, and this was how I repaid her? My sister's message was different. She was screaming into the phone, calling me every name she could think of. I was vindictive, petty, Cruel. How dare I pull the rug out from under her like this? How dare I spy on her business? The boutique was legitimate, and I'd sabotaged her opportunity. She'd never forgive me for this. The second message from Mom was quieter. She asked if we could talk, really talk. She admitted that maybe my sister had crossed a line with the papers. Maybe they should have called first before coming over. But pulling the rent payments and transferring the mortgage back? That was too far. That was cruel. Couldn't we work something out? I finally called my lawyer and played him the messages. He asked again if I was sure about all of this. Once we moved forward with the restraining order and the financial demands, there was no going back. Family relationships would be permanently damaged. Was I prepared for that? I thought about the paper shreds on my floor. The months of work destroyed in minutes. The years of loans never repaid. Boundaries never respected. Excuses never ending. The expectation that I'd just keep giving while they kept taking, and any attempt to say no was met with guilt trips and destruction. I told my lawyer to proceed with everything. Update 1. The restraining order was approved 3 days later. My sister tried to come to my apartment the day after I'd sent the investigator's report, probably to confront me in person. She found a police officer waiting instead, serving her with the order. She had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Mom showed up at my office the following week. My business partner intercepted her at reception, explaining that I wasn't available and that she needed to leave. She tried to push past him, causing enough of a scene that building security got involved. I watched it all on the security cameras from my office upstairs. She looked smaller somehow, older. Part of me wanted to go down and talk to her. The rest of me remembered every excuse she'd made for my sister over the years. Every time she'd guilt me into helping just one more time. The mortgage situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. Mom couldn't afford the payments, just as I'd known she couldn't. But instead of losing the house, she ended up selling it. The market had gone up significantly since Dad died, and she walked away with enough equity to buy a small condo outright and have some savings left over. She sent me a check for $30,000, her half of what I'd paid into the mortgage over 3 years. The note with it said she didn't want to owe me anything. I deposited the check and sent her a receipt. No other communication. My sister's situation deteriorated faster. Without the rent payments, she was evicted within 2 months. She tried to apply for actual rental assistance programs, but discovered her credit was worse than I'd thought. Multiple collections, defaulted loans, even a judgment from a former roommate she'd stiffed on utilities. No legitimate program would touch her. She moved in with Mom temporarily, which lasted exactly 3 weeks before they had a massive fight. Mom kicked her out, and my sister ended up on a friend's couch. The friend lasted 2 months before also asking her to leave. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard my sister tried to reach out to Dad's side of the family for help. They all knew about the money she'd borrowed from me and never repaid. None of them offered her a place to stay or financial help. Apparently, I wasn't the only family member she'd burned over the years. The $15,000 demand went to collections when she refused to acknowledge it. My lawyer assured me we'd eventually see some of it garnished from any wages she earned, but it would be a slow process. I didn't care much about the money anymore. The principle mattered more. The best outcome was my business. Without the distraction of family drama, I rebuilt those destroyed documents in half the time it took originally. My lawyer had copies of some materials, and the people I'd been negotiating with were understanding about the situation. The patent applications went through. The investors came on board. We opened the second office, and revenue doubled within 6 months. I did eventually respond to one of Mom's messages, about 4 months after everything went down. She'd sent a text asking about my birthday, whether I had any plans. I told her I was fine, that I hoped she was doing well in the condo, and that I needed more time before we could have any kind of relationship again. If she could respect that boundary, maybe eventually we could rebuild something. But it would require her to acknowledge what had happened and why, not just brush it aside as me being too sensitive. She never responded to that message. My sister tried a different approach around the same time. She sent an email apologizing for destroying the documents. She claimed she hadn't realized how important they were, that she'd been stressed about money, and took it out on me unfairly. The apology felt rehearsed, like something she'd workshopped with someone coaching her. It didn't mention the $15,000 she owed me. It didn't mention the years of borrowed money and broken promises. It didn't acknowledge the scam she'd almost pulled me into. It was just sorry for the papers, and could we please move past this? I didn't respond to that either. The truth was, I didn't miss the drama. I didn't miss the phone calls asking for money or the guilt trips about being selfish. I didn't miss wondering when the next crisis would hit or how much it would cost me this time. My life was quieter now, simpler. I had clear boundaries and people in my life who respected them. Sometimes I wondered if I'd overreacted that day. If maybe I should have just asked them to replace the documents, filed an insurance claim, moved on without blowing up the family relationships. But then I'd remember that it wasn't really about the papers. It was about a lifetime of being treated like an ATM with no feelings, no boundaries worth respecting, no accomplishments that mattered unless they could be converted into cash for someone else's benefit. The papers were just the final straw, the moment when I realized that staying quiet and keeping the peace was costing me more than cutting ties ever would. A year later, I'm still here. The business is thriving. I'm dating someone who doesn't come from a complicated family situation and can't quite comprehend mine. When I explain what happened, she asks if I feel guilty. I tell her the truth. Sometimes, late at night, I do. But mostly I feel relieved. And that relief tells me I made the right choice. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.